the mind always needs to focus on something, but it can only focus on one thing at a time. And through my breath, I can consciously direct the focus. And if I don't direct the focus, it's just gonna focus on everything that happens to me in the environment, on the outside things and not on what's going on inside of me.
Welcome to Magic in the Moment, Mindfulness in Real Time. My name is Clayton Platt, and I'll be your host for this podcast journey. And for many people, practicing mindfulness has very little to do with sitting on a cushion, lighting incense, or even focusing on their breath. Just paying attention to what they're doing at any moment. And doing this intentionally can create that same magic. Our time together is intended to share how mindfulness plays out in everyday life for our guests. And before we begin, here's a word from our sponsor, Meditation for Leadership. We all feel it, the pressure to keep up, to perform, to push through. But lasting success doesn't come from speeding up. It comes from slowing down, leaning in, and creating the space to lead from within. That space is where we shift from autopilot to intention, building mindful habits that strengthen focus and calm. It's where we stay connected to our values and purpose, choosing to respond instead of react. It's where we unlock our potential to positively shape our own lives and empower others to grow and thrive. That's the work of Meditation for Leadership. If you're ready to create the space for sustainable success, visit meditationforleadership.org. When we consciously breathe into the belly, there is very little room for our minds to start telling us stories. That's my guest today, Hans Whiteold. And those words stopped me when I first read them because they name something I've experienced on the cushion for 25 years, but I rarely hear said so plainly. Hans spent 15 years running a family business, and on paper, everything looked fine. Beneath the surface, he was struggling with depression, anxiety, and a quiet battle with substance abuse that most people around him never knew about. And the turning point came not in a boardroom or a therapy office, but through breathwork and a journey to Peru that fundamentally changed how he understood himself and what he was here to do. Today, Hans works as a breathwork facilitator and emergence coach, supporting people who are ready to make radical changes, people navigating addiction, emotional overwhelm, or simply growing sense that there has to be more than this. What I love about Hans's work and why I really wanted him on this show is that he's not teaching mindfulness as a concept. He's using the breath as a direct door into the present moment, real time, every time. So Hans, welcome to Magic in the Moment. I'm really glad you're here.
Thank you so much for that introduction, Clayton, and it's an honor to be on your podcast today.
So you spent 15 years in the family business before becoming a breathwork facilitator. That's a pretty significant shift. What was life actually like in those years? What was going on beneath the surface, and kind of set the stage for us?
Sure. Life, as you mentioned, to the outside looked good. I was getting a good paycheck. I had everything that I could dream of at that point, but inside I just felt hollow and not fulfilled. It seems like I was chasing money with the goal to retire and live the life I want to. And that just led to depression, anxiety, and eventually substance abuse and self-destructive behavior.
So in that time, I'm interested to know what helped that transition. So how did you, I don't want to say stumble upon, how did breath work emerge in your life as a way to navigate what you were going through?
It's a kind of long story, but I'm going to share the short version. First of all, I realized this is not going to work for me any longer, and I wanted to make a change. But I did not make the change because of fear, the fear of the unknown, the fear of what's next. And part of my escape mechanism was traveling. And I traveled over a decade ago to Peru and had the opportunity to experience ayahuasca for my first time. And during that time, I was filled with such a love of joy for life, for the present moment, that really changed how I started to see myself and the world. And it sent me on a long journey of exploring my consciousness. That ayahuasca ceremony in Peru really paved the way for me to free myself of substance abuse and addiction. However, still there was something missing inside, and I was filled with guilt, shame, and regret for my past lifestyle choices. And then, as a result of my visit to Peru, 2 years later, I stumbled across breathwork. And my first breathwork session really helped me overcome my regret of the past, the worry about the future, and helped me to live in a more present moment.
So, what I'm hearing is the mind, that time traveler, right? The mind that goes back and ruminates on all the stuff that went on in the past and won't let it go and shames us and fills us with guilt and regret, or the mind that flies to the future, worrying about what's coming up and becoming overly anxious about things that haven't happened yet. What I'm hearing is that the breath brought you here, now, in this present moment. Is that an accurate reading?
Yes, that is a very accurate reading. At that time, at my first breathwork session, every thought in my mind ceased to exist. And without that thought, I stopped. I stopped projecting my past into the future, and that helped me to stay present. And in this moment, there was just bliss and beauty, and the understanding that the only thing that's holding me back is those thoughts and beliefs that I hold on to and struggle to let go of.
So the sense that in for me, the beauty of following my breath in my world on my meditative journey is that if I'm focusing on what's happening inside me, the physical sensation of the breath coming in through my nose, my chest expanding, my belly expanding, I'm just following that cycle. If that's where my focus is, if that's where my concentration is, if that's where my attention is, it can't be on those other things that are distracting or troubling the ego, the mind chatter. There's only one place for that focus to be at one time. And if it's on my breath, that allows me to be right here. And does that sound in a similar way for your experience?
Yes, what I learned to understand is the mind always needs to focus on something, but it can only focus on one thing at a time. And through my breath, I can consciously direct the focus. And if I don't direct the focus, it's just going to focus on everything that happens to me in the environment, on the outside things, and not on what's going on inside of me.
Yeah. And I think it's natural. My understanding, I've done some study around neuroscience, which is for me the some of the underpinning of my love of mindfulness is that there's an intersection between understanding how the brain works and wanting to expand my sort of knowledge and experience with bringing it here into the present, and the mind's propensity to be anxious, to worry, to try to take control over situations is a natural aspect of evolution. That the mind was helping protect us when we were an earlier species wandering the savannah, right? And it was like, you got to watch out for the saber-toothed tigers. You got to watch out for and there was a reason why those concerns would pop up to prepare us. But millennia later, we don't need that so much. We don't need that, the physical barriers or the physical warnings that the mind is trying to come up. And as you said, the mind only focuses on one thing at a time. And the ability to make that choice to say, okay, I'm going to focus on my breath or my body. We have those things with us, don't we? We have our breath, we have our body 24 hours a day. And that can be a very handy tool then to help us get away from the distractions and the worry and the ruminations, the mind travel back and forth, but to say, this is where I want to be, right here. If you, this would be very instructive for me. When you're going through the issues of substance abuse, how did the using breath work, if in fact you can make that direct link, how did that help you navigate the transition from what was controlling your behavior and allow you to emerge from that?
I think the major transition was gratitude. I stopped regretting my past lifestyle choices and realized that my past lifestyle choices brought me to where I am today. And today I'm the happiest man alive. I'm just filled with love and gratitude. And I think that was a powerful moment when I stopped rejecting my past, but accepting it. And with that, I stopped blaming my substance abuse for my depression, for my anxiety. And at that moment, the substance lost all the grip they had over me. By blaming them, I gave them the power. But I guess breathwork showed me that the power really I have inside, and nothing has a power over me other than the power I give to it. And that really shifted my relationship.
I'm just going to let that sit for a second because that's incredibly powerful. That sense of letting go, that sense of moving away from blame. I think that naturally we want to explain things, right? That's part of what the mind is trying to do, explain. And it's like, Hans, all the troubles in their life are caused by A, B, C, D. And we get so fixated on that. And then we want to explain, why did that happen? Because I was behaving badly. I was making bad choices, et cetera, et cetera. And you carry that with you. And when you're carrying that with you, that baggage is taking up really valuable energy and brain space. It seems like you were able to release, and that opened you up to being able to see the pure beauty of you as an individual, what you're bringing to the world, right? And celebrating that gratitude. That's a real mindset changer, isn't it?
Yes, gratitude is a real mindset changer because, and some of the audience has heard that before, but anxiety and fear cannot coexist with gratitude. Once you find gratitude for the moment, you stop losing the fear of the future or the worry about the past behavior.
So you described something that I was really interested in. So that the intensity of your early breath work was comparable to working with psychedelics. And we haven't talked about this in this podcast. This is something that is interesting to me. I'm not necessarily someone who is making a case for or against the use of psychedelics, but I am interested. This is becoming more and more of a mainstream conversation. Can you help listeners understand what this actually feels like? So the intensity of breath work or working with psychedelics, what happens in the body when the mind finally goes quiet?
Let's start first in the breathwork session. What happens in the body? When you do
Yeah.
the breathwork that I facilitate, you do a very intense, deep diaphragmatic circular breathing without a pause between the in and the out breath. And while you're doing that, you inhale more oxygen like you usually do and exhale more CO2 when you usually do. Because of this changed ratio of those two gases, the blood starts turning alkaline and it lowers the activity in the prefrontal cortex. And with less activity in the prefrontal cortex, or the part of the brain, the executive function of the brain that creates the image of the self, you start experience more inner silence and peace, and you get access to deeper parts of the subconscious mind where all your emotions and learned behavior through childhood experience are stored. So you have the opportunity to release stuck emotions that create automatic behavior or tend to project the past into the future. And when you release them, it becomes easier and easier to stay in the present moment.
So I'm picturing a model of the brain, and I love the specifics that you've just shared. If we are concentrating and doing that cycle of breath that you described, taking in more oxygen and exhaling more CO2, we are also quieting the work of the executive brain, the PFC, the prefrontal cortex, which is we need it. We need our executive brain. It's making a lot of important decisions for us, but it also is a place, as you mentioned, that a lot of the noise comes from. So our ability to quiet that allows us to tune. In a way, I'm thinking about the old days with the radio where you'd have to turn the knob to get the station you want to listen to, right? But able to turn into the insights of the other parts of the brain that are often overshadowed by the noise of the PFC. And there's important information there, isn't there? You mentioned childhood experiences, things that happened in our history that may be important for us to understand our current behaviors. They get buried, they're having an impact on us, but we don't, if we're not having an opportunity to kind of tune into what was happening then, we can't put the puzzle together. And that sounds like that was part of what was happening in your life. Is that a fair assessment?
Yes, I think what you mentioned resonates very much with the concept of the implicit and the explicit memory, because a lot of that information from our past childhood is stored in the implicit memory, and we are not aware of that. But through breathwork, as you said, you're fine-tuning the channel. You become more aware, you can listen deeper to yourself, and you bring awareness to those experiences in the past that formed the implicit memory. And through that, we can make them conscious and bring them into the explicit memory and start seeing them from a different angle. And that way, we can change our implicit memory with new information from the present moment. Does it make sense?
It makes a lot of sense. So I'm thinking, and correct me if I'm wrong, I am frequently wrong, as my father used to say, often wrong, but never in doubt. Does this fit in with your work as an emergence coach? Because it sounds to me like being able to tap into that transition from implicit to explicit memory is giving you tools to become more aware of who you are and perhaps set the intention of who you want to be. Am I correct in that reading or shade me in the right direction?
No, that's 100% spot on, because that is the whole goal with emergence coaching. Bringing more awareness of who you are today by identifying how you became who you are, what stories and identity you built based on your past experience, and then relating everything to your current life situation and seeing how certain aspects in life, events, what people say, how that relates to your past, and tying that back to how you feel in the present moment.
I don't think enough people give themselves the opportunity to do what you just described. And I think it's really important because there's so much about how how our behavior is today that was informed our childhood by the teaching of family, of society, of culture, all that imprint and all the things that in essence were part of the molding in our early years. And you used the expression our identification. We over the course of our lives, we are constantly identifying ourselves in certain ways, and that has a huge impact in how we act. And so it's making so much sense to me if we can go back and make that shift from implicit to explicit memory and gain a greater understanding and control over how we identify ourselves. It makes huge sense. And I would say that it's probably not a subject that a lot of people naturally want to lean into because it's a little scary, isn't it?
It can be really scary doing this work, but it's so much worth it. Talking about identity, if you don't mind, I can share a small example from my life.
I love it.
There were two identities that were very predominant, the inner narrative that I was listening to. One was, you're not good enough, you're a failure. And the other one is, you're not a public speaker, you have nothing to say, no one wants to hear what you're sharing. And I identified how that belief was shaped in an early childhood because I was the youngest of four children, and everything on the table was already set. I was the youngest. Everyone told me, stop being annoying. Nothing that I said really had a lot of value. And at the same time, I love my mother to death, but she used to tell me, speaking is silver, silence is gold. And that's how I really shaped that belief that what I have to say is not worth it. And that affected me for over 20 years in my life because everything I did in college, I avoided public speaking, presentation. Every management meeting I went to, I would not speak up. I would not share my opinion. I now see what my mom said meant with speaking is silver, silence is gold. She meant something totally different than what I understood that time. And one of my intentions with breathwork was to overcome this belief that I cannot speak in public, that I have nothing to say. And I challenged myself to start speaking in front of camera, first with Facebook Live videos. Eventually, I started joining a Toastmaster session. And now I enjoy public speaking. And I'm deeply grateful to have the opportunity to have this conversation with you. When I first started, it brought so much awareness to why I wasn't good in speaking. And bringing that awareness alive in the moment helped me transform my relationship with myself.
I was thinking the youngest of four and the messages that you're hearing. And first of all, the messages you hear are not necessarily the messages that are intended, right, by the speaker. So it's our interpretation of that. And you're understanding that your mom's speaking is silver and listening is gold wasn't to say shut up, but rather to say listening is really important and how that impacted you as a child. And I'm thinking, I was the youngest of four, and quite the contrary. For me, I found early on that I could entertain. And that was the value that I sensed I was bringing to my family. That's how I got attention. I could do imitations. I could tell jokes. I was, comfortable in that regard. And that informed so much of my early life. In fact, most of my adult life. And being mindful of that has really helped me say, no, wait a minute. Take that moment. Listening is gold. What do other people have to bring here? It's not about my ability to own the room, but rather my ability to maybe set the stage and allow other people like Hans to share their wisdom and be a partner in that. And so we have different paths and different journeys, but I'm thinking back to how childhood really informed my adult life in so many ways. And the ability to say, oh, that's okay. It doesn't make me a bad person. Accept it, maybe laugh about it, and then listen more from my standpoint. And for you, it's talk more, share your wisdom. Don't be shy with that. I love it. And bring me now back into how breath work helps you continue that journey. What is it specifically about the breath work that supports that and reinforces that?
But breathwork itself, the breathwork sessions that I do, they can help you release stuck emotions, identify limiting beliefs, and reframe your relationship with the past by starting to seeing the past from a different angle. As you said, you had a similar, you were also the fourth child, but you grew up totally different than I do because I gave different meaning to what I experienced in life. And so I was looking at that thing from a very narrow angle. And breathwork can open up your perspective, and then you start seeing different angles and create different meaning of the experiences. So that in that way, breathwork is a wonderful tool to help you grow, emerge, and access deeper wisdom from within. I like to call breathwork a catalyst of developing unused human potential because it helps you remove everything that's be standing in between you and your highest potential, all these limiting beliefs, emotions, judgments, blames. And I learned to take responsibility instead of blaming my past, my lifestyle choices, things that people said to me. Instead of blaming, I started taking responsibility for my own life and doing what I can do right now, today, to change the past parts of me that I rejected.
The ability to look at our past and decisions we've made, choices we've made, own them, as you said, take responsibility, but not spend our lives in self-flagellation about woe is me, I'm awful, but rather to say, okay, that was how I behaved. There are lots of reasons for that. I'm a human being. I'm imperfect. We all are. But also, what can I learn from that? You know, what, how can I use that as an impetus for emerging into a better version of myself? I love that. And if I could, I want to take us back some how the mechanics of breath work allow this to happen. You did refer to that earlier, and it's really interesting to me, and I think it's interesting to the audiences. What is it that's actually physically happening that allows that space to open?
I think mechanically, that's a very good question, and I'm going to do my best to answer that. I believe a lot of emotion gets stored in our nervous system and in our body, and through the release of emotions, we can release the stuck energy in our physical body. I'm not sure if that answers your question, but it helps you regulate your nervous system and you get out of the fight and flight mode from the sympathetic system and helps you live more present in the parasympathetic system. Instead of fight, flight, or freeze, you're able to stay more in the parasympathetic system, rest and digest, and that is where your prefrontal cortex can do its best work. As long as you are in the sympathetic nervous system, because of our level of evolution, our emotions have precedence and we cannot fully access our prefrontal cortex because the emotions override our logical brain to protect us from threats that may not even be there, that we just associate. Certain noises, certain words that people say, they can create a threat if they take us back to our childhood where these emotions started to develop.
So, for people who are less attuned to this, the sympathetic nervous system is tied to our limbic system, right? And that's where the fight, flight, freeze mechanics of our nervous system live. And that typically, and you're the expert here, but typically the sympathetic nervous system is initiated through the breathing in. And we think back to, okay, how does that fit? Think back to early man, and something is happening that is dangerous. We start breathing quickly, we're breathing in, and it's triggering the sense of, okay, let's get out of here. Whereas the parasympathetic nervous system is the exhale, and it's releasing that, and it's bringing us more into a sense of calm. And as you mentioned, and I was taught this a while back, the limbic system and the executive brain don't share the stage at the same time. It's one or the other. So what we need, if we want to be able to be thinking clearly, is to gently remove the limbic system from the stage. And that means longer breaths, longer out breaths, so that we're calming down and allowing the executive brain to function in a state of calm as opposed to the massive chaos of the threat. Does that make sense?
Yes. And yes, you mentioned something very important. The faster breathing triggers the sympathetic nervous system. As you said, once we're in that fight, flight, and freeze, we breathe shallow and fast. And through breathwork session, you can actually get into the similar state, but being in a safe environment, because you are in a safe space where it's safe to release emotions. And then you have a facilitator with you, and that helps you experience the past in that sympathetic nervous system and release. And then when you go back to slow breath, you can consciously activate the parasympathetic nervous system. And that is the beauty of breath, because as you mentioned earlier, we have it's available to us 24 hours, and we can use it at any moment when we become aware of what's going on inside of us to break the cycle that has kept us trapped in the past and in fight, flight, and freeze.
Okay. I'm going to ask us to do something right now. So if someone's sitting at their desk right now and they're feeling stressed or scattered or disconnected, what would be one breath-based practice that they could do in the next 60 seconds? What would be one practice? And in fact, if you could suggest something, and maybe if you feel comfortable even demonstrating it, what might that be?
Yeah, I think my favorite breathing technique for that is called the 4-7-8 breath. You inhale for 4 seconds, you hold your breath for 7 seconds, and you exhale for 8 seconds. In through the nose, into the belly, and then slow release through the mouth. And several things happen. Your blood pressure lowers, your heart rate goes down, and you activate the parasympathetic nervous system. And we can maybe do 3 or 4 rounds together, if you're open to that. And then,
100%.
okay. So when I guide people through that, let's just do it. Okay, you take a deep breath in, 2, 3, 4, hold, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, exhale, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Inhale, 2, 3, 4, hold, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Exhale, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Inhale, 2, 3, 4, hold, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Exhale, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And you can do that at any moment in time. And you do it for 1 minute, 2 minutes. If I do it at sleep, I usually fall asleep before I've done 10 rounds. And the more consciously you do it, it starts becoming an unconscious habit to breathe into your belly. And there you can program positive behavior into your implicit memory that it becomes automatic behavior. And this is extremely helpful, especially if you're a reactive person who gets triggered by when other people say something, when you get offended and you start reacting emotionally. You learn to catch yourself, and before reacting, you take a deep breath and then let it go. And instead of reacting, you learn to respond from the present moment and not dictated by your past lifestyle experiences.
It's really creating that space, right? That space between the stimulus and the response. As Viktor Frankl would say, that's the magic. That's the power. We get to choose what we do with a clear mind. And I'm thinking that technique is used by first responders, by Navy SEALs, by people in the military, by athletes. And there's a reason why people in very important situations, it could be life and death, or it could be a case of making a putt in the final hole of the Masters golf tournament, where you're putting yourself in a position to be in the flow of the moment as opposed to being distracted by mind chatter and all the sometimes detrimental things that the mind can do, bring you calmly into that moment. It's powerful. And you talked about the sleep I know I use it sometimes. I know I've shared this with other people who have found it really helpful. And we go back to a couple of things. One, what's happening with the breath. The other thing is, where's the focus? The focus is on the counting, right? So the focus isn't on, why did I have that conversation? Why did I send that email? Why is my spouse doing this to me? But it's on 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. And that takes us back to the old days where we were taught to count sheep. And there was a reason why people said, you can't sleep, count sheep. I don't know whether they did that in Germany, but in the States, that was a huge thing. If you can't sleep, just count the sheep. And that's where the focus was. It was on the counting. It wasn't on the breathing necessarily. I think that brings a huge impact to it. But giving the brain something to focus on other than what is distracting can be really helpful.
Yes, you intentionally start directing your focus. And yes, we have the same in Germany, counting sleep, but doing the breath at the same time, I found it much more beneficial. And yeah, it brings you back to the present moment because you're focusing on exactly what you're doing. You're not laying in bed trying to fall asleep and getting all angry and mad and upset that you are not getting asleep while thinking about tomorrow or your past or get trapped in your life stories.
Yeah. So I want to bring us back into sort of the personal experience and Hans's life, because this is, to me, really inspiring. Your journey has, the more I've spent time letting it sit with me, I'm very impacted by it, Hans, and I'm grateful for that. And you left this demanding career with the intention of being more present with your children and to help support others. And I have to say, that shift is really a profound act of presence in and of itself. What did you have to let go of internally to really make that move?
Fear, a lot of was tied to fear. Fear, not knowing how I'm going to support my family when I leave that position. Fear of the unknown and the belief that I'm not good enough and that I don't have what it takes to stand on my own 2 feet besides the work I was doing in the family business. And I guess most of all, blame. Because as long as I was blaming others, situations, and my past, I wasn't able to take responsibility of my life. Because if nothing is my fault, there's nothing I can do to change it. But when I found how that I'm responsibility, that suddenly gives me back the power to make a difference, to make a change, and to create the life I want.
I would imagine, and I could be wrong, that there wasn't like an instantaneous switch, that this was a process. And along the way in this process, those doubts could reemerge and that sense of blame, maybe the imposter syndrome could arise. Were those some barriers that you had to overcome along the way?
Yes, for sure. It was a long process because I had wanted to leave that business for over a decade and I couldn't because with my mind I was trying to create or come up with what I want to do. I said I cannot quit my job until I have the next steps laid out in front of me. However, I just couldn't lay them out because I had no clue. And then you would say it's a long process, but then one thing happened at work. And when that one thing happened, I said, I'm going to quit. 2 weeks is my last day. I think at that time I was pulled into the present moment and I realized I'm not going to accept this situation any longer for me. I stopped worrying about the future because I have to make the change in the present moment. And when I did, I guess one thing that we teach in breathwork, one of the main guiding principles is trust. Trust the process. And when you start trusting the process of breathwork, or when I started trusting the process of breathwork, I started to trusting life and not running away from it, but facing it.
So I'm thinking about this, that transition from a personal standpoint, really difficult. And that sense of you made that decision. I'm quitting in 2 weeks. And that forced the issue, right? That the unknown, the fear of the unknown, that uncertainty was a real barrier for you. It's like, I can't make the transition until I know the path forward. And you're saying, no, the path forward will evidence itself when you close that door in a way. And I'm thinking, so now you're helping other people make those transitions. And I guess I'm interested to know what that work has taught you about presence that you couldn't have learned any other way.
I love that question, and I love how it's challenging me to become more present. Doing this work, I have the opportunity to be present with people when they experience breathwork, when they release emotions, when they share difficult past experiences. And there's something powerful in listening to others, not just for them, but also for myself. And I guess how this work really helped me to become more present. I get to practice being present with my clients every time I work with them. And the more I do, the easier it gets.
As someone who spends time with people from a mindfulness facilitation standpoint, you said something that really struck a chord with me, and that is how much we learn by listening, how much we learn from the experience of others. Our opportunity as quote unquote teachers or facilitators, I think something that draws me, and I'm hearing that from you as well, that draws you into this work is that we have the opportunity to continue to evolve ourselves by what we learn from other people and their experiences. It makes us richer. And I identify with that. And I think that, again, knowing that each of us is imperfect, each of us has our own foibles that we're going to continue to deal with, perhaps in more intentional, evolved ways over time, but understanding that as humans, we share that wonderful sense of imperfection, but also we are perfect just the way we are right now. Can we evolve? Yes. But at this moment, bring us into right here in the present. I think there's nowhere else we're supposed to be. I'm supposed to be having this conversation with you and learning from you. And that's the only place I want to be right now. And there's a beauty to that. And when the distractions happen and pull us in 1,000 different directions, our breath work can make us open to that and say, no, I'm not worrying about my doctor's appointment coming up in the afternoon. I'm here with Hans, and I'm just benefiting from this conversation in ways that I didn't even imagine. So that's very cool for me. And I would ask this, if you could put maybe just one idea into the hands of, I'm thinking now of like high achieving professionals. And I think you deal with some of them. I deal with some of them. What one idea could we put into their heads? One thing about the breath, about presence, about showing up in real time. What would that one idea be?
Before I answer that question, I'm just going to make one remark that you just said about listening to others, how that can help. It helps bring to my awareness what judgments come up while I'm listening, what emotions I start feeling, what body sensations I have. And I guess that is one thing I can share with high achievers, because every time you do that, you become more aware how your actions and how you lead are driven by your unconscious emotion that you're avoiding, suppressing, ignoring. And the more you do, the more it helps you to see others for who they are. And the more you see others for who they are, the more they will appreciate you as a leader and how you lead. And I guess as a leader, the main goal is to bring out the best in others. And our breath helps us to bring out the best in ourselves. And we can only help others in the way we help ourselves.
Incredibly profound. So to be the best service of others, we need to be taking care of ourselves, and we need to bring ourselves without judgment into the present moment and remove our filters so that we're actually hearing what they're saying and being conscious, as you said, the physical reactions, the emotional reactions that we have in any instance, in any conversation. They're creating barriers to really being part of that conversation, that interaction. So being able to notice, ooh, I'm starting, like my breath started to get short. I started to get a little agitated because I don't particularly like what I'm hearing. Wait a minute. Let's actually hear what's being said before that reaction closes the door. And our breath can help us do that. We can notice the change in our breath. We can consciously take that deeper exhale to bring out the parasympathetic nervous system. And then it says, yeah. So I'm taking care of myself to be present, to calm down, and I'm modeling what I want with the people that I'm leading and showing that I'm doing this to be here present with you. And that sends a pretty strong message, doesn't it?
Yes, it helps you. I think I learned that from Jack Cornfield, loving kindness. It helps you to respond with loving kindness from the present moment, and that changes everything in relationships.
It absolutely does. Hans, I've had just so much, I was going to say fun. Fun is maybe not the right word, but it's been incredibly instructional. Uplifting is the word I'm thinking of. This has been incredibly uplifting for me. And I want to know, where can listeners find you and go deeper into the work that you're doing?
I do have a webpage, newmorphosis.com, and I'm also on LinkedIn and most active on Facebook as Hans Andreas Weygoldt. And you can always
Well,
shoot me an email.
we will put this into the show notes. And once again, Hans, I am incredibly grateful for the time we spent together. I've learned so much, and I've had, I think, some things that were important to me very strongly reinforced, and that's a good thing. Thank you so much. Thank you for sharing your personal journey, and thank you for what you're doing to help others on theirs. Thank you so much, Hans.
Yes, thank you so much for the opportunity and for your questions. Every time you ask a question allows me to dig deeper in what I understand and helps my critical thinking and gaining more clarity. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Hey, thanks for listening. I want to give a big shout out to John Gehring of Story Trust Media for his expert editing and wonderful production guidance. I also am deeply grateful for the ongoing support I receive from Meditation for Leadership and their sponsorship. So that's all for now. Until next time, this is Clayton Platt saying, watch for those moments of magic when mindfulness shows up in real time in your life.